fairly quickly, just hitting the points that we need to for the exam. There's going to be less information about elasticity on the exam this time than last time, because obviously we're learning it 2 days before the exam. I'll try to keep it just like the most intuitive stuff that you're gonna something that I think you would have to use later, or that you may have to use later, instead of making you memorize stuff. Here's a chapter outline. Section 6.4 and 6.5 we're just not covering at all, so you won't have to worry about that for studying. And 6.3, I think there's like one slide on that. So besides that, we're mostly focused on what elasticity is for supply and demand, and the variables that determine the price elasticity of demand. I think for non-econ majors who aren't going to do this for a living, those are the things that you have the most chance of using. Not saying that you will have to use them. Okay, so the question they pose: do people respond to changes in the price of gasoline? So there's some people out there that argue that consumers don't change how much gasoline they buy when the price changes. You guys think this is correct? Basically, no matter what the price is, people are going to buy the same amount. Generally, people are going to buy, for goods overall, they'll buy less when it gets more expensive. So back in April 2014, the price of gas was $3.60 a gallon and fell to $2.50 per gallon by December. And we saw that gasoline consumption rose by 7%. So people do have some sensitivity to price. As the price falls, they were willing to buy a little bit more gasoline. All right, people do respond to incentives. They change their behavior as the prices of goods change, their incomes change, price of related goods change, all those things. But if other goods fell from $3.60 to $2.50, or fell by a similar percentage, we might see a much larger change in how much people buy because of how sensitive they are to price. A certain amount of gas, people are going to continue to buy no matter what the price is. In the short term, I need to get to work, so I'm going to at least spend as much money on gas to get me back and forth. I may not go out to visit friends in Pittsburgh as often, or I might hit the grocery store on the way home instead of making a special trip out. So I may reduce my gas somewhat, but I still need a certain amount. So I'll be less sensitive to price than maybe another good that I could cut out completely or reduce a lot more and do so easily. So even though we saw consumers change the amount of gasoline they purchased when the price changed, they didn't appear to change it by very much. So what elasticity is a way to measure how much the quantity changes when the price changes. So we can determine how sensitive people are to a change in price. So there's one idea that's to look at the slope of the demand curve. Normally when we draw them in this class, we draw curves like that at 45-degree angles because it's the simplest to work with. That's the real reason. But they can really be any shape or any slope. So the demand curve, instead of being like this, could go straight down, it could go almost straight across, depending on how sensitive people are to a change in the price. But that's not a great way to compare across goods, because what units you use for the price is going to change what the slope is. So if you use dollars versus thousands of dollars versus millions of dollars versus some other country's currency, that'll change it. So instead, we define this term called elasticity, which is a measure of how much one economic variable responds to changes in another economic variable. And for this, we use percent changes for both of those variables. That way, we don't have to worry about units. So we're only going to focus on the price elasticity of demand and the price elasticity of supply. The chapter mentions a few other ones that are a lot less important for what we're going to be doing in this class and what you guys are going to be doing out in the real world. So very simply, the price elasticity of demand is the percent change in the quantity demanded of the good divided by the percent change in price for that good. really how sensitive the demand is to the price. So although the slope and the price elasticity of demand are related, they're not the same thing. So if you use, I don't know, the y equals mx plus b thing from algebra and determine the slope, it's going to be different than the price elasticity. Since price and quantity, they move in the opposite directions for demand. When you use this formula for a problem, the answer is going to be negative. We normally refer to more negative elasticities as being larger. So if the price elasticity demand for two products, one is -4 and one is -2, we're going to say the -4 is larger. So think of it like the absolute value in math, where you ignore the negative sign, and it's just about how far from zero it is. Because we're saying the good that has an elasticity of -4 compared to -2 is more elastic. It's more sensitive to a change in price. It'll make more sense as we dig into this. So we say that demand is elastic if its price elasticity of demand is larger than 1. Again, it's absolute values. So it'll be -2, -3, -4. These are all larger in that sense than 1. So for instance, if there's a 10% increase in the price of this good, if the good is elastic, we'll see a greater than 10% decrease in the quantity demanded. So there's more than a 1-for-1 change. If demand is inelastic, then its price elasticity of demand is smaller than 1. So it'll be, 0.5, or in this case, -0.5, smaller than 1. So it changes a lot less. It changes less than in response to a price change. And then there's a term called unit elastic, and that's if the price elasticity of demand is exactly equal to 1. So there's exactly a 1-to-1 change. So here we have two different demand curves. So we have D1 right here, and the second demand curve, D2, right there. So along the first demand curve, cutting the price from $3 to $2.70 moves you from point A to point B. So the number of gallons sold, this is for gasoline, so number of gallons of gas sold moves from 1,000 gallons at $3 to 1,200 gallons at $2.70. So in this case, the demand is elastic between point A and point B because we're seeing a large change. Along D2, if you move from $3 to $2.70, you cut the price by the same amount, you're only moving from point A to point C here. So it only increases from 1,000 to 1,050 gallons being sold. So demand is inelastic on D2 between point A and point C. Yes. So we're going to work out an example showing the math to see that along D1 moving from A to B, that's going to be greater than 1. As right now, we just have to take the slide's word for it, that the number is greater than 1, but you can see there's a very large change. And you can tell, even without doing the math, that moving from $3 to $2.70, that percentage change in price is lower than the percent change in quantity from 1,000 to 1,200. So, for example, moving from point A to B, the quantity increased from 1,000 to 1,200, so it's a 20% increase. Sorry, we're going to basically skip through this. The main point of this is that if you move from, go from one way, a change, like a decrease in price, or change increase in price, if you use the simplest formula, you're going to get different answers from each way. So because of that, we use the midpoint formula. So our percentage change determine the move from 1,000 to 1,200, or from 1,200 to 1,000, so we get the same answer, is to use this more complex formula. Okay. So using that formula, so we get the same answer going from both sides. This little more complex formula, but it turns out it's very simple to use. So you have here the change in quantity, and here the change in price. So the change in quantity, the second quantity minus the first. And we're going to divide that by the first quantity plus the second quantity divided by 2. Then to get the change in the price, we'll do basically the same thing. The second price minus the first price. And then divide that by the first price plus the second price divided by 2. So it makes it easier. You can think of the change divided by the average. Okay, so here they give an example of a different gas station. So you cut the price from $2.50 per gallon to $2.30 per gallon. And the sales go up from 2,000 gallons to 2,500 gallons. So in order to calculate the price elasticity of demand for gasoline, for this example, first thing you do is average the quantity and the price. So you take the average, those two numbers, the first quantity plus the second quantity divided by 2, the average price of the first price plus the second price divided by 2. In this case, $2,250 and $2.40. I don't like that they don't show the formula and plug things in. So I'll show that after this. So now, the percent change in quantity demanded, we have the initial quantity, the new quantity minus the initial quantity, and then divided by the average. So we end up with, let's say multiplied by 100, we get 22%. Percent change in the price, same basic thing. The new price minus the old price divided by the average between them, multiplied by 100, and you get 8.3%. And finally, divide the two by each other. So you divide the percentage change in quantity demanded by the price for the percent change in the price, you get negative 2.7. Because it's greater than 1, the absolute value is greater than 1. In this case, it's scholastic. They don't. So now I'll fill out the formula for you. So Q2 minus Q1, Q1. Okay, so back to our example, just filling this in. All right, so just help me out so I don't have to keep looking around. What's the first quantity in our example? 2,000. And the second one is 2,500. And now the second price. And the first one? 250? All right. I think this is easier than doing a piecemeal like they did. So we have the new quantity minus the original quantity over the sum of the two quantities divided by 2, or the average of the two quantities. So they broke it up. First they did this, and then they got the answer and plugged it in there. I think these formulas are easier when you just put everything in, because there's not really hidden information here. They probably gives you both the two prices and the two quantities. So, I mean, the math is right there. So let's look at the second example they give and work through this together. So what if the quantity only increases to 2100? So in this case, this much steeper demand curve, moving from point A to point C, it only goes from 2,000 gallons to 2,100. I'll write this one over here. So what's the first quantity? That should be enough space. And then what's the second quantity? What does it change to? 2,100? All right, so then Q1 plus Q2, so 2,000 plus 2,100. Now, what's the original price? In this case, it's the same as before. They make it real small there. So it's $2.50 going to $2.30. Okay, so from there, we'll just work this out. Someone to punch it in their calculator and tell me, well, they show the answer there. Okay, so the average between 2,000 and 2,100 ends up being 2,050. Oh, I gotta break that lower, sorry. The numerator, 2,100 minus 2,000, 100. So multiply that by 100 to get percentage, because we want to work with percents here. So that is, go through the math, 4.9%. This right here is going to be the same as before. I can't do that in my head. So it's going to be, all this is going to be equal negative 8.3. From there, we just divide. So this whole thing is 4.9. This whole thing, negative 8.3. So 4.9 divided by 8.3 is negative 0.6. So negative 0.6 is less than 1. So it's going to be elastic or inelastic. That's right, inelastic. All that math to basically tell you that when you change your price, the quantity demanded doesn't change very much. You guys understand the basic idea behind elasticity? So even though the slope and the elasticity are not the same, they're pretty related. So if two demand curves go through the same point, so like these two demand curves in this example, the one with the higher slope also has the higher or has a greater elasticity. So a vertical demand curve means that the quantity demanded does not change as the price changes. So in this case, the elasticity is 0. So a vertical demand curve is perfectly inelastic. You guys think of examples of goods that would be perfectly inelastic? That the price, or yeah, that any change in price will not change the quantity demanded.
Gas would be in that category because we all need gas.
I mean, it's close, but people's demand still changes.
Slightly.
Yeah. One example they give. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say like electricity. So like what you pay for a house. If you own a house, like you're not gonna stop paying your electrical bill.
Yeah. It's not perfectly inelastic, but it's extremely inelastic. I mean, it's like the meme of like the dads shutting off lights when people aren't in the room using it. So there's still gonna be some change. A good example example that we use is insulin for diabetes. If you have diabetes, you can't choose to not use insulin because the price has changed. When I asked you a couple weeks ago about best cities to travel to, who was it that said they wanted to go to Crescent for the smack? Right there, okay. So things like heroin could have a perfectly inelastic demand curve. Can you explain why? No, not for like occasional fun time users like you, but for like the heavier users. Go ahead.
Physiologically dependent on the substance.
Yeah, if you're truly addicted to something, it doesn't matter what the price is. So in that case, the demand curve would be perfectly inelastic. Again, there's very few goods that are perfectly inelastic. And usually it's because of a physical need. So whether it's like a medication that you can't do without, or whether it's a drug you can't do without. There's also perfectly inelastic demand. So where the quantity demanded is completely, no, I'm sorry, that was an example. Getting ahead of myself. You can also have a horizontal demand curve. And in this case, the quantity demanded is infinitely responsive to price changes. So in this case, the elasticity is infinite. We call this perfectly elastic. So if there's any increase in price for the good, people are not going to buy any of it. I don't remember what I gave as an example for that, so let me pull it up online. I didn't give an example last time. I think the textbook says like farm goods that can't be differentiated. So if one farm tries to increase the price they're going to sell like their wheat at, whoever's buying it can just go to a different farm. Again, this is also very rare.
Google says gold, silver, platinum.
Gold, silver, and platinum? Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean the same basic reason, because you can't differentiate gold. It's just like the weight of like the gold. So that's like where the value comes from.
So that kind of be like caps and like or ceilings and floors of items? Like like you can't sell milk at like a higher rate than whatever like they have.
Those are like legal, there's legal reasons.
Okay, so this is just like,
This is just, if you try to price it higher, no one's gonna buy it. If you price gold above, I don't know, the market price of gold, people aren't going to buy it because they can get the same exact thing somewhere else. And the final special case I mentioned earlier is unit elastic, where the percentage and the price change is the exact same as the percentage change in the quantity demanded. Okay. Now here, the slides give a summary of price elasticity of demand. So if it's elastic, greater than 1, inelastic, less than 1, it gives examples of the supply curve. These are all the things we just went through, so I'm not going to do it again, but left it in there to help you study. So, do people respond to changes in the price of gasoline? Now that we've learned a little bit about this, we can answer the question a little better than from before the chapter. So the gasoline demand is inelastic. So the quantity demanded does not change much as the price of gasoline changes. But it's not perfectly inelastic because there is still some change to the price, somewhat responsive to price. All right, so which of these two panels represents the market for gasoline as responsiveness? In this first one, we have the supply curve shift to the left as the price increase from price 1 to price 2. The quantity demanded remains the same. In this one, price increases from P1 to P2, so the supply curve shifts. And in this case, the quantity demanded decreases from P1 to P2. Which one of those two demonstrates what's going on in the gasoline market?
The one on the right.
Right, the one on the right. If you want the market for SMAC and Crescent, that's going to be on the left, the supply and demand curve. Because you have the quantity demanded not changing. It's completely vertical. All right, so determinants of the price elasticity of demand. So, question they ask, why do some goods have a high price elasticity of demand while others have a low price elasticity of demand? There are several characteristics of the goods, markets, individuals that help determine the price elasticity of demand. The first is the availability of close substitutes. So if it has more close substitutes, it's going to have a more elastic demand. So in the short run, for gasoline, there's few substitutes. So the price elasticity of demand is very low. Obviously, in the longer term, there's more substitutes for gasoline. In the short term, there's not much else you can put in your car to get you from point A to point B. But how can you substitute away from gasoline in the long run? You can buy an electric car, which obviously you can't just go out and do during the day if you see the price change. That's a longer term decision. Buy a bike. I move within walking distance. In some cities, you can use public transportation. I don't think there's a Alvarado to Altoona bus line. I kind of hope not. So in the short term for gasoline, you're pretty much stuck with it. But in the longer term, there's more options, more substitutes. However, another example for Nike, let's say Nike sneakers, there's a lot more substitutes. You can do Reebok, Adidas. So their price elasticity of demand is much higher. The basketball guys, do you consider Reebok and Adidas sneakers substitutes for Nikes?
I guess. I wouldn't necessarily.
If the price of your basketball sneakers, the Nike basketball sneakers went up Would you go out and buy some Adidas or Reeboks? Does anyone wear Reeboks?
No, not that I know.
Yeah. So you can tell this was written by like people in their 60s. Yeah. So for some people, like for me, just lifting into Stepio, it doesn't matter if I have Nikes, Reeboks, Adidas. Like the brands don't matter. But for someone playing basketball, like competitively, those other brands might not serve as a substitute. How we define the market and what uses people have for the products helps determine what can be considered substitutes or not. So there's a lot of different ways to like divide that up. The next is the passage of time. So over time, people can adjust their buying habits more easily, like I was talking with the gasoline. So yeah, you can buy a more fuel-efficient car, or you can go like full electric with a Tesla. Do they have a lot of Tesla charging stations like in the area?
Apparently there's like 6 at the Sheets in, down
In Altoona?
Yeah.
I knew there was like one in Altoona. I didn't know if there were any options to like, if that was become like a regular thing at Sheets. I mean, like,
Yeah, they're tough.
because they're like renovating them all now. So that might not be an option here. Even over like a couple year period, it might have to be like a lot longer so you can do it up here. Yeah, you can always move closer to work. Those sorts of things that aren't that aren't like products that can be considered substitutes are just ways to change, so that you become more sensitive to price. The third is whether a good is a luxury or a necessity. So people are a lot more flexible with luxuries than necessities. So price elasticity of demand is higher for luxuries. So milk and bread are like necessities. So people are going to buy them every week, pretty much regardless of price. For some reason, if there's a storm, everyone runs out and buys just milk and bread. You look at the shelves, like pretty much like everything is still pretty full, but then milk and bread are gone. Like someone's literally taking like a bowl of milk and putting it in bread. Never understood that. But luxuries, people are going to be more sensitive to price. So if we're talking like vacations to the Caribbean or like buying products like yachts, like people are going to be a lot more sensitive to price because these aren't things that they need, it's things that they want. Next is the definition of the market. So the more narrowly you define a market, the more substitutes are available. So the more elastic demand is. So if you define the market more broadly, so you say, just looking at jeans, the market for jeans, if you don't think there's a good substitute for jeans, I don't know, pants that are like pretty casual but like hardy enough, like long lasting, your demand for jeans can be very inelastic. Not a lot of good substitutes. But if you define the market as like brands of jeans, you will be a lot more sensitive to price. You can switch from, I don't know, Wranglers to like Levi's. So yeah, so the more laser focused, the more narrow your market definition, the more substitutes are going to be available. Next is the share of goods in consumer budget. So if a good's a small portion of your budget, you're not likely to be sensitive to price because it doesn't mean that much to you. It's not that much money. So yeah, if you buy like table salt once a year, like any spices, you buy pretty rarely and it's like $1 or $2 for like a little jar. A price change, even if it doubles in price, you're really not going to care. You may not even notice it. But if the price of your apartment doubles in a year, you're going to notice that significantly. Like that's going to be a substantial burden for you, so you're going to be a lot more sensitive to that price. Start looking for other places like as soon as possible. Okay. Here there's some, the textbook estimates some real world prices. and elasticities of demand. So you look at things. Look at like sugar. They gave a lot of these as examples, but like sugar and milk, gasoline, these things are very inelastic. If the price changes, people are unlikely, especially in the short run, to change their behavior, to buy less, because they're a small portion of people's budgets. They're considered necessities. They may not have good substitutes. Do you guys think all those different like almond milk and those things are good substitutes for milk? I'm not really a milk drinker, so do you think like the taste is close enough? And
I mean, they taste pretty good, but they're way more expensive.
well, yeah.
I think if you would have started out drinking almond milk like as a kid, like your parents got you one, you'd be less likely to drink regular milk growing up. So I think, yeah, definitely.
It wasn't like Joaquin Phoenix talking about that the other night. Or like the Oscars or whatever the last award ceremony was. What? I was like, I heard someone making like fun of him on the internet, but I didn't. I know if it was like the new one or the last one, or they are all the same to me. We look at things like books. They have a high elasticity demand. Why might books have a high elasticity of demand? There's so many. What other reasons? There's a lot of reasons. So, cheap or free substitutes.
They're kind of more of a luxury. Instead of spending $10 on a book, you can spend $10 on a Netflix subscription.
Yeah. And so you're defining the market more broadly. So you see books as entertainment. So books are not just competing against other books, they're competing against Netflix, competing against hanging out with your friends, competing against, I don't know, live events.
If it's like a non-fiction book, then the material inside can be outdated pretty quickly. So depends on that, I guess.
All right, yeah. I'm sure there's like a dozen more we can think about if we wanted to waste the rest of the class doing that. Here's just an example of how broadly or narrowly you define the market. So the price elasticity of demand is pretty high for post-Raisin Bran because there's a lot of substitutes for that. There's how many other cereals. But then as you get to all of the family breakfast cereals, which I guess is code for like not sugary and like tastes like crap. No offense if you guys like any of you guys like Raisin Bran. But that price elasticity of demand is lower. And finally, all breakfast cereals. There's a lot fewer substitutes for all breakfast cereals. You can do like eggs or oatmeal, but like there's so the price elasticity of demand for all breakfast cereals is going to be much lower than all of one type of cereal or just one particular brand of cereal. So the more and more substitutes you get, the higher the price elasticity of demand. The more options you have to go to get a different product to fulfill that need, so the less, or the more sensitive you're going to be to price. So something you're worried about, we'll skip supply. This will be the last thing we do before the review. If you're a business owner, one of the things you need to do is determine how to price your product. Determining how to price your product is very difficult. Some firms just guess. Some firms will try out different variations of price. One thing that you need to think about is how many customers will I gain if I cut my price, and how much revenue will I gain if I cut my price. So again, the total revenue is the total amount of funds received by a seller. So you take the amount of revenue you bring in, subtract away the cost of producing and selling those goods. So yeah, so if demand for your product is relatively inelastic to price, customers are not very sensitive to the price of your product. So if you decrease the price, you're not going to gain many additional customers. So the few additional customers you do get are not going to compensate you for the lost revenue. So overall, your revenue is going to go down if you cut prices. So for your gas station, people's demand for gasoline is relatively inelastic. If you cut your price, you're not going to get that many more consumers coming in. So you're going to end up losing money. On the other hand, if your product is relatively price elastic, so people are a lot more sensitive to price, if you decrease the price of your product, you can expect to gain a lot more customers. So all these new customers are going to more than compensate for the lost revenue. So overall, it's going to go up. So people, the last one, books. If you cut the price of books a little bit, you'll get a lot more buyers because it's much more elastic. And the same holds true for if you increase the price. So for books, for an elastic good, if you increase the price of your product, you're going to have a lot more consumers go buy from a competitor or go buy a different product. So you'll end up losing a lot more if you raise the price. Whereas if you're selling gas and it's inelastic, if you increase the price, you're not going to lose a lot of customers. So knowing the relative elasticity of the product you're trying to sell, understanding that market can help you when to price, when to change your price, if you can withstand increasing your price, and where you can price it at, like initially. So this just graphically gives an example of a price cut. So when demand is inelastic, if you cut the price, it reduces your total revenue. So if you just compare the two areas of these, you can see visually that's going to end up reducing the revenue. Whereas here, when the price of the good is when the good is elastic to the price, the area what you make for the new consumers is going to be larger than what you lose from the lower revenue. It's just a more visual representation of what we talked about on this slide. Okay, we'll skip supply. We can talk about that after the exam. Go over real quickly just so you're aware of what it is. It's basically the same exact thing as price elasticity of demand, but it's just from the producer's perspective instead of from the consumer's perspective. Okay, so with that, yeah, we got about 20 minutes left to go over the review, answer any questions you guys have for the exam. I know for the first exam with a new professor you haven't had before is the worst because you don't know what kind of questions they're going to ask. After you get like first couple exams under your belt, like you can start to anticipate what they're going to put on the exam, how they grade, and what they're going to answer. So I want to give you guys as much opportunity now to like ask questions, make sure you understand the material we're covering.
So price elasticity of supply isn't on the exam?
That's not going to be on the exam.
Okay. And then also there's on the syllabus it said something about like online quizzes that would give us like bonus marks. Are we still doing that or no?
No, because I can't. I don't have those quizzes. Was that still on the syllabus?
Maybe I looked at like an old one.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know if I thought I deleted that from the syllabus, but I don't know. So there are going to be, because I don't offer that, Timmons offers that in his class. Because I don't offer that, I'm going to have extra credit questions on the exam. So you can build up extra credit that way. So I had the study guide on Canvas. If you want to understand more on elasticity, I have 2 videos that I posted on Canvas that you can go over. They're like 5-minute ones that just an alternate explanation. So if you want to do that to help you there's going to be very little elasticity on there. Basically, the stuff we covered early on, trying to understand the concept of it. So, it's kind of small. But what questions do you guys have about the information, like that was on the study guide, will be on the exam?
As far as the format goes, you probably explained it last week. How's it going to be set up?
So it'll be 25 multiple choice questions, and then 5 short answer questions.
On the study guide, you put a question. It's what is the difference between positive and normative economics according to you, which you explain?
Yeah. So positive economics, or positive analysis, is trying to understand like the relationship between 2 things, or the process that's going on. So everything I explained about elasticity today has been positive analysis, trying to understand what's going on. Normative analysis is using like a value judgment, so saying what should be. So an example of positive and normative economics, or positive normative analysis, is if you were looking at a particular like regulation, if you explained how it worked. So like last class we talked about occupational licensing, explaining how occupational licensing increase the barriers to entry, increase the cost of like joining a profession, so it reduces the number of people in that profession. That right there is positive economics. Then normative economics or normative analysis is saying, because fewer people can enter the occupation, this is bad, and we should get rid of it. So normative is making like those value judgments, whereas positive is just explaining what's going on. And the question on the exam doesn't include James Buchanan, what he said, but he said we should focus on positive economics. So before I get to your questions, how I designed this study guide last year was I wrote the exam, and then I went through and took the subject from like each question and wrote a more of a broad question about it. So if you can go through this study guide and like answer all these questions, you'll very easily be able to answer like all the questions on the exam. So as an example, for like, what are the 3 key assumptions of economics? The first question, and like explain what they mean. If you get a multiple choice question on that, it'll very likely list the 3 key assumptions. It'll have like A will be 1, B will be 1, C will be 1, and then D will be like the wrong answer. And it'll say like pick which one doesn't belong. Okay, so you had a question, right?
Yeah. So with the assumption of rationality, isn't that basically like, did we have a straight definition for that, or is that just kind of like we assume that all people are rational because if we don't assume that, then we can't do anything?
That's pretty much why it's important. There wasn't a precise definition, but basically rationality is a person weighs the costs and benefits of an action, and then acts in their best interest. So it's like, if you have like, I don't know, two options, you're not gonna pick the one that you think is worse for you. You're gonna pick the one you think is better for you. Now you can be wrong. You can weigh those costs and benefits incorrectly. But at the time, you pick which one that you think is the best.
I don't have this in my notes anyway, but it was the Alkean-Allen effect.
Yeah, that was the third law of demand. That was example I gave was cigarettes. No, that was they did cigarettes. The answer I gave was rat traps. They tried. It's always Sunny references.
I think I meant right.
So if you have two goods with of different different qualities, and you put like the same lump sum tax on them, people are going to shift to buying the higher quality good because it ends up having a lower opportunity cost. So the basic idea is you thinking of opportunity costs when you're weighing like what good to purchase. Because it's not just the price of a good that's like the cost to us. It's what we have to give up to get that good.
Can you go over marginal analysis and decision?
Yeah. So marginal analysis is just thinking of the next unit. So if you go and buy something, you're not choosing between like all the clothing and all the food in the world. You're deciding between like, do I want to buy a shirt or do I want to get a hoagie for dinner? It's just like the next unit. So like marginal decision making is the same thing. It's literally just making a decision on the next thing you want to buy. Later on, we'll talk about firms and their production decisions. And the production decision is always, do I make an additional unit? Is it worth it to do one more?
Can you go over an example of like being able to like draw a supply and demand curve and like what exactly like you want labeled and stuff like that?
Is there a specific question that was?
It just says be able to draw a supply and demand curve and
Oh,
explain the
okay.
effects of a shift in the supply curve and a shift in the demand curve.
Okay. I erased it. Okay, so for supply and demand curve, best way to go. You have the price there and the quantity there. So label price and quantity. Then you have the supply curve and the demand curve, and label those. If the question asks you about like what's the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity, then just showing that where those two curves cross is that price and that quantity. Oftentimes we'll put like a little asterisk next to them to show that they're equilibrium. You guys don't have to do that, but as long as you have it labeled like P and Q, so we know that's the equilibrium price and quantity. I usually put dashes to show that it's straight down from that equilibrium, but you can, if you want to, you can just like do a little tick mark there on the axis to show it's up there. It's easier though if you do this if we're working with shifts in the demand curve. So if the demand curve shifts out, there's an increase in demand curve. Someone tell me what's going to happen to the new demand curve, where that's going to be. Is that over here? That's right. If you want to show that this is the second curve, you can either label it like D1, so that's the original, and D2, or leave the original one the same and put like a little tick mark there. Now the whole class is here. There's no econ majors in it, right? Okay, so yeah, so the specific doesn't really matter as long as you can demonstrate to me make it clear to me that this is the original and this is the new one. That's what matters. If not, if you just draw two curves like that, I'm not going to know which is the original, which is the new one. So, a little tick mark or a 2, a little arrow there showing that I moved from here to here. Now I understand what's going on. And then once you, so I've asked you a question like about shifting, about the demand curve increasing. So you show shifts out, and then you show what happens to the price and the quantity. So here you show me the price increases and the quantity increases. Yeah, for that question, if you literally just say like, the price increases, the quantity demanded increases because the demand curve increases. Like all the explanation you need. If I do like require more, I will say like in the instructions, explain this or explain that. But I don't think I do for the first exam.
The questions the alpine and hour.
Yeah. That was the third law of dynamics. To answer his question. If you can generally explain like that slide that I have on it from, is that chapter 3? That'll be more than enough to be able to answer that question, the question I have on it. Just if you had the two goods of different prices and different qualities, you put the same tax on both of those, people are going to shift their demand towards the more expensive one, the higher quality one. That's not in your textbook, but that's something I want to include because it demonstrates the importance of opportunity cost. Because even though they're both getting more expensive, you have to give up less of the cheaper good to get the more expensive good, so more people will want the more expensive good, which is counterintuitive when you just see the price change.
We have to do one of those math questions.
No. I was originally planning on it, but there wasn't enough time to do it today. And then I wanted, like last time I did it, so I did it the one class, and then next class we like finished other stuff up and reviewed. So there was time if you guys had questions, or they had questions to ask about it. But I think it's fairly simple, but still like. Yeah, I'll probably shift. I'll probably take 2 questions that were on the exam, like harder ones about elasticity stuff, move them to bonus. So if you guys want to study it and get that right, you can. You get the points. If not, you don't have to. Remember, for the short answers, even if you don't know, put down something.
A joke, a funny joke.
Even if it's a funny joke. I can't give you partial credit if you leave it blank. Number of people who did that last semester who needed the extra points was really disheartening. I mean, you just like repeat the question basically. That was like a statement, like how you like BS questions
Yeah.
with like the little bit of information you like get from them. You write that in, and like I'm like, oh, I can give you like 3 points out of 10 for that.
Wait, they're each 10 points?
The short answer was.
Yeah. Yeah, let's have the exam and have some multiple choice. So if you guys have any questions,